Good day, everyone. I am Maricel Garay, and today we are going to tackle about the factor analytic, genetic, and evolutionary theories of Raymond Cattell. Raymond Cattell is known for using factor analytic methods rather than more subjective or qualitative methods to explore personality traits. The factor analysis method is what led Cattell to identify the 16 individual traits that are central to his personality theory. Cattell's theory of personality described 16 personality traits that each person possesses to varying degrees. The 16 primary factors of personality as described by Cattell's personality theory are as follows: warmth, reasoning, emotional stability, dominance, liveliness, rule consciousness, social boldness, sensitivity, vigilance, abstractedness, privateness, apprehension, openness to change, self-reliance, perfectionism, and tension. The personality traits are referred to as primary factors, of which someone can be in the low range or a high range. According to Cattell, there is a continuum of personality traits. In other words, each person contains all of these 16 traits to a certain degree, but they might be high in some traits and low in others. For example, if you scored in high in warmth, you would be considered a cold or selfish person. But if you scored in a low range, you would be considered a supportive or comforting person. So in the 1940s, Raymond Cattell and his colleagues used factor analysis, a statistical method, to narrow down all Port's list to 16 traits. However, numerous psychologists examined Cattell's list and found that it could be further reduced into 5 traits of personality. The model became known as the Big Five, and many hasn't received much attention. It is widely accepted theory of personality today. These Big Five code factors, it is known by the acronym of ocean or cano, with the letter O stand for openness to experience, C stand for conscientiousness, E stand for extraversion, A stand for agreeableness, and letter N stand for neuroticism. The Big Five traits are the most important for getting an abstract theoretical understanding of the big overarching domains of personality. In order to apply factor analysis to personality, Raymond Cattell believed that it was necessary to sample the widest possible range of variables. Cattell took a statistical, measurable approach to studying personality rather than utilizing observational and qualitative data. He wanted to apply factor analysis to personality. To do this, he categorized data into 3 parts to achieve a large, comprehensive method of sampling to capture the full range of personality dimension, and these are: the first, life data or the L data, which involves collecting data from the individual's natural everyday life behaviors and measuring their characteristic behavior patterns in the real world. So second, the experimental data or the T data, which involves reaction to standardized experimental situation created in a lab where a subject's behavior can be objectively observed and measured. And third is the questionnaire data or the Q data, which involves responses based on introspection by the individual about their own behavior and feelings. So Cattell believed that the personal assessment work best when the psychologists understand a person's entire personality sphere, To accomplish this, one needs to measure L data, Q data, and T data. So now let us know what genes are and how they work. So our body contains 100 trillions of cells. The nucleus and human cell are inside, except the blood cells. Each nucleus contains 46 chromosomes arranged in 23 pairs. One chromosome of every pair is from each parents. 23 from your mother and 23 from your father. It is equivalent into 46. The chromosomes are filled with tightly coiled strands of DNA. The genes are segments of DNA that contains instructions to make proteins, the building blocks of life. It is important that we should know what genes are and how they work in day-to-day inside of our body so that we have knowledge about it. By focusing on a specific characteristic and comparing various individuals, behavior genetics help us to understand the relative contribution of heredity and environment. So, behavioral genetics is the study of the relative power and limits of genetic and environment influences on behavior. So, if the children are unrelated or adopted, raised in the same family and grow up to be similar in regard to a trait such as extraversion, we may conclude that the shared family environment had an important role in the development of a trait than the heredity. So, if the children tend to be dissimilar, we might conclude that the genetic contribution was the more significant one. So now let us move on in the influences of heredity and environment. So heredity and environment, the interest in relatives influences. It is also the similarities in twins reared apart. It is to estimate extent of genetic and environmental influence of the traits, and the intelligence and timidity highly are heritable. One of the popular study in behavioral genetics is the twin study. Twins are separate individuals, yet they are very much alike, but every time when we see twin, we are curious about it and starting to think, how do they form? Why there is twins are not the same in terms of gender? Are twins have the same personality? And more questions that comes up in our minds. So now, let us explore to answer some of your questions. So first, let us define identical and fraternal twins. Identical twins are twins who develop from a single fertilized egg. They are genetically identified, and also identical twins are also called monozygotic twins. They shared placenta. So fraternal twins are twins developed from separate eggs. They are genetically no different than other siblings. Fraternal twins are also called dizygotic twins. Twins are separate placentas. So the logic behind studying can be easily understood. The identical or monozygotic twins develop from a single fertilized egg. They have the same genes and the same parents, and from a genetic point of view, they are clones of each other. Any differences between monozygotic twins must be due to dissimilar experiences. So the fraternal or the zygotic twins develop from two ova. They share the same parents, but they have different genes and are no more alike than regular siblings. The differences between DZ or dizygotic twins must be due to genetic effects and separate experiences. The heritability is an estimate of the degree to which a trait or the characteristic is caused by the genotype rather than the environment. It is a proportion of an individual's characteristics that can be attributed to genetics or heredity. The heritability of a trait may vary. It depends on the range or of environments and population studied. For example, is your father is easily get angry, therefore you inherit from him for being an angry too. So how exactly do the genetic instructions passed down from both parents influence how a child develops and the traits they will have? So in order to fully understand this, it is important to first distinguish between a child's genetic inheritance and the actual expression of those genes. So, a genotype refers to all of the genes that a person has inherited. The phenotype can include physical traits such as height and color or the eyes, as well as non-physical traits such as shyness and extroversion. The twin studies is used to determine the heritability of a given trait. The data collected from both identical and fraternal twins on the trait and compare the data between the two groups. It is important also to not to conclude that the specific behavior is inherited. So the twin studies provide evidence regarding the role of genetic factors. The basic rationale is that identical and fraternal twins develop under similar environmental conditions, but identical twins share more genes. If identical twins end up more similar on a given characteristics, it must be genetic. The adoption studies, it compares adopted children's traits with those of their biological parents and their adopted parents. The trait similarities with biological parents attribute the trait to heredity. The trait similarities with the adopted parents attribute to the trait to the environment. The adoption studies indicate that there is more than chance similarity between adopted children and their biological parents. The temperament is a person's characteristics, emotional reactivity, and sensitivity. The heredity seems to predispose human temperament differences. The temperament is assigned to personality. For example of temperament includes shy, risk-taking, and cautious. Cattell 1960 advocated the technique of multiple variance analysis or MAVA, which studies twin and siblings who have been reared either together or apart. However, before the early 1980s, twin and adoption were done outside by the mainstream of psychology and have little impact on the field. The multiple abstract variance analysis is also a statistical technique used to estimate the proportion of variance in a phenotypic trait due to genetic and environmental factors. So the MAVA aims is to estimate the relative genetic and environmental contributions to trait variation by comparing variances between the families to those within families on the trait under study. In the last several decades, the design of genetic studies has become highly sophisticated and varied, going far beyond a simple comparison of monozygote and dizygote. The evolutionary psychology is the study of evolution of behavior and the mind using the principle of natural selection. The principle that among the range of inherited trait variation, those lead survival and reproduction were most likely passed on to succeeding generations. So evolutionary psychology helps us to understand the psychological mechanism such as Big Five evolve because they solve specific adapted problems in human ancestral environments. Therefore, factor analytic trait theories are the excellent example of scientific theories of personality. The genes that code for beneficial trait are likely to be passed on to future generations because they help an organism to survive and reproduce. The genetic factors influence environmental responses, and environmental factors alter gene expression. So we use the term of epigenetics, which is the study of heritable changes in the expression of genes that caused by the environment. And that would be all for today's discussion. I hope that you can learn from my discussion. Thank you.